Hi booktube, how are you all doing? I hope you've all had a really good week and I hope all your reading has been good, as promised in my Friday reads last week. Here's a video about Bleak House by Charles Dickens. Before I dive into Bleak House, I thought I'd just give you a quick summary of my week in reading, just very quickly. It's really just involved two books. Once again, the Other Tiger. I'm slowly making my way through this anthology of recent Latin American poetry, and I'm really enjoying it. Just not getting to it as much as I'd like to, but hopefully I'll get more of this read soon, and hopefully maybe record a video just looking at this book in more detail. And then the other book I've been reading, I started this on Sunday, filming this Thursday night and about halfway through, but hopefully I'll be able to finish it this weekend. It's Nostromo by Joseph Conrad, and again it's kind of setting a bit of a Latin American theme for what I'm reading at the moment. This is set in a fictional South American country, somewhere around the turn of the 20th century, and yeah, it's really interesting. A bit of a slow start, but again, maybe this will get its own video once I've finished it. But yeah, let's jump into Bleak House. Yeah, I think I'll talk about the plot, not in too much detail, just because if I'm talking in too much detail about the plot, I'll probably be here until the until the cows come home. But yeah, sorry, it's getting late. I also had my first shot of the COVID vaccine, so not exactly 100% today. But yeah, hopefully this will make at least a little bit of sense. So I thought I'd give a little plot summary and I guess more of the premise of the book. So most of the book is narrated by a character called Esther Summerson, and she's essentially been chosen to be the sort of companion for a character called Ada. Now Ada and her cousin Richard are they're both claimants in a court case, and in the period the book is set, and indeed the period when the book was written, the courts in Britain were well, not very official, not very efficient to say the least. Yeah, so the word these, its name was Chancery, the Court of Chancery, and it was kind of a byword for inefficiency, red tape, just overly bureaucratic and quite overly ceremonial. The Lord Chancellor, who oversaw everything without a jury or anything like that, would be robed in red and gold, so it seems even more grand and even intimidating than the legal system we have right now. And the case in hand is Jarndyce and Jarndyce. It is a case where there are many potential wills that this guy called Jarndyce has left, and no one knows which one is the right one. And so we have a complicated case and a very inefficient system, and the two together just means that it's looking like it's never going to be resolved. So Richard and Ada are two young claimants in this case. It may be that they might come into a lot of money through maybe some of the potential wills. And so one of the other claimants, a man called John Jarndyce, who lives in Bleak House, has arranged for them to live with him, and basically he's going to look after them, maybe steer them on the right path in life, because he's done his best to just avoid the courts at all cost, and to live on his own means and not depend upon any potential money he may come into in the future through the courts. So they're all coming to live with him in Bleak House, and basically one half of the narrative is just about what they get up to, how Richard and Ada develop, and how their relationships just develop over at Bleak House, and they meet loads of people and they make friends, and the characters they meet themselves, whether at Bleak House or on little holidays and excursions, is part of how the plot thickens in this book. But the other half of the narrative, I kind of think of the book, it's almost like, you know, on a cassette, and you have two tape heads, and then you have the tape wound round around one of them, and it's connected to the other one, and it feeds through and eventually winds around the other one on the other side. And I kind of feel like Bleak House is almost like that. And so Esther's narrative is one of the tape heads, and the other is to do with the Deadlocks, who are an aristocratic family. And so essentially the whole novel is really giving us this whole cast of characters, and it's really just seeing how these two people, Esther and the claimants for Jarndyce and Jarndyce over at Bleak House, and Lord and Lady Deadlock, and seeing just how they connect and how their lives are interwoven. And really the story for the Deadlocks really picks up when they get back from a trip, I think the trip in Paris, and they've just got back and having a meeting with their lawyer called Mr. Tulkinghorn, and Lady Deadlock expresses some interest just to know who's written one of these legal documents, and this document has just been copied out, and they had people that they hired to copy out court documents in Lawhand, and so Mrs. Tulkinghorn just says he doesn't know, but he can find out if she wants, and she just kind of gives some casual kind of interest, but Mr. Tulkinghorn is still intrigued and goes digging, and so that's kind of how the plot develops on their side, and eventually the two will come together. Obviously the Jarndyce and Jarndyce case is very important, but there are a whole host of other characters who live near and around the court, who do a lot to change the lives for both the characters at Bleak House and the Deadlocks. So yeah, that's probably all I'll say about the plot. It is really complicated, but it's all really interconnected. And I think if you were just interested in Bleak House for its plot, just for what happens, not necessarily the characters, but you know, just for the plot, I would probably say that you could probably get on very well by just watching this BBC adaptation, to be honest. And I'm going to get on a bit later about maybe the relationship between the adaptation and the novel itself, and how the two may complement each other. But you know, just purely for the, you know, getting from A to B, you know, beginning, middle, end. Let's see what happens. You know, Bleak House is a big book. It's nearly 1,000 pages long, whereas this will only take you a few hours. So honestly, I would just say just watch watch this. However, I'm not saying don't read the book, and there are many more elements where I would say that it's more important to read the book. Now the one element where I'd say that the book is maybe more important, and on the whole the book does a little better, is the issue of characters. and I've touched on this actually a bit, I think in my first video actually, and I'm going to talk about the same character again, just because it surprised me so much when I found a certain passage. So there's this character called Judy Smallweed, and I think she's the granddaughter of Mr. Smallweed, who is a collector of bills. So if someone's in debt, Mr. Smallweed, you know, will get onto it and press the person to pay up, and we'll get money out of it. And that's essentially, yeah, you know, he's basically just someone who, it's kind of like a shark, really, just sniffing out for money wherever he can get it. He's quite a ruthless character, one of the more unlikable characters. And in the TV show, in the adaptation, Judy, I think his granddaughter, is really just there to kind of follow him around. He's normally carried on like a stretcher type thing, or in a chair, and he's always complaining about his old bones and he needs someone to shake him up. So Judy's just there to shake him up, really, and to shoo away people that he doesn't want there, or just to go get him things and whatever. She only speaks in the TV show a couple of times, whereas in the in the book, I think she just talk a little bit more than that. And there's just one paragraph in the book that I just found really interesting. Let's see if I can find it. Because one word that comes up a lot with Dickens, or at least that I've heard come up a lot with Dickens, is caricature, and that his characters can seem maybe a little cartoonish or far-fetched or over the top, and that may be true in many cases, but the thing that I was reminded of when reading Bleak House is even if a character is cartoonish, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a depth to them, that that their presentation, it can be more than just the surface level. And I mean, even with say like kids cartoons and stuff, that often can be just passed off as silly, and yet they can be moving and touching, and even help us understand ourselves a little better. And I found this paragraph where we're meeting the Smallweed family for the first time. It's about a third of the way into the book, and it's just this one paragraph about Judy that really surprised me, so I'll just read it. So, Judy never owned a doll, never heard of Cinderella, never played at any game. She once or twice fell into children's company when she was about 10 years old, but the children couldn't get on with Judy, and Judy couldn't get on with them. She seemed like an animal of another species, and there was instinctive repugnance on both sides. It is very doubtful whether Judy knows how to laugh. She has so rarely seen the thing done that the probabilities are strong the other way. Of anything like a youthful laugh she certainly can have no conception. If she were to try one, she would find her teeth in her way, modelling that action of her face as she has unconsciously modelled all its other expressions on her pattern of sordid age. Such is Judy. And so although that might be a bit over the top, and in a way it might even be poking fun at Judy a little bit, I think it still gives you enough room there to sympathise with her a little bit. She's never had a chance really to make friends, and that her experience with her family has made her seem like a total other species to other human beings. And I just found it extraordinary, really. And I had watched the adaptation at least 3 times before reading the book. I was a kid when it came out on TV. I can remember watching it as a kid on TV, and so, you know, I just had the idea of Judy as just being the side character, and in the grand scheme of things, in the book, it's you know, she's just a side character. But I just found it remarkable that Judy has her own paragraph, and that you're given the chance to sympathise with Judy. And that's, you know, that's one of the things I found great about reading Bleak House as opposed to just watching an adaptation of it, is that you're just given so much more chance, so many more chances to sympathise with characters, to get to know them more. So this isn't always the case. I can think of the character Alan Woodcourt, and maybe for the first 2/3 of the book, although he's in a few scenes, really you could blink and miss him really. Yeah, yeah, he's in a few scenes. You may be told a few times what he's up to, what his plans are, and his various exploits. But really he's just kind of glossed over. It's only about 2/3 of the way through that, almost as an afterthought, in Esther's narrative, she tells us that he's a potential love interest, yeah, that was like one of the few things in the book that kind of annoyed me a bit, was it did seem like an afterthought, and that he was this character who was kind of there, but kind of wasn't. He was half invisible, really, to me. And then suddenly, we've been told this whole time that that Woodcourt and Esther Summerson have been, you know, talking, and that she's been thinking of him, and yeah, there's this potential that they you know, they could be a couple or something. Yeah, I just found it quite funny, the way that was presented. Whereas in the adaptation, because obviously they knew eventually that he was going to be a love interest, it means they could like slowly build that up, and in those scenes where it's kind of half invisible, they could make a bit more of him. So I think that's one of the ways in which the two complement each other. There are certain characters who you might think are a bit overlooked in the TV show, who you're given a chance to sympathise with in the novel, and then other characters who maybe don't get as much time as you'd like, and the adaptation picks them up and flashes them out a bit more, which, yeah, I think is great. And just as a reading experience, I think lots of people say that Dickens' writing is just, it just can be a bit too much, a little, I don't know, bombastic maybe, and you know, there's the whole thing of him being paid by the word and stuff, and yeah, I can definitely see that, but I think, like, for me, like, even though I'd seen the adaptation at least 3 times before reading this, reading it was still a discovery, I think, for me, which I think says a lot of Dickens' writing style, and yeah, just of the world of this novel, as great as the adaptation is, and definitely for just getting the simple plot and knowing what happens, it's great, and it flushes out other characters, and yet there's something of the experience of the book that the adaptation can't quite do, and for me, yeah, I mean, it was great just to spend a month just kind of submerging myself in this world. Yeah, one last thing about it that I really loved. I read, it's just on this little author note just at the very beginning of the of this edition I have, and it mentioned how the period around the time Dickens was writing this is towards the end of his career. I think somewhere within the last 10 years or so, maybe yeah, just a little more than 10 years before he died. His politics are getting a little more radical. Not that radical, I don't think, but a little more radical. And obviously one of the stereotypes with Dickens that we think of. Obviously, we always think of the of the poor children on the streets, and the dirtier side of London. And then on the other side we have the idea of benefactors and beneficiaries and stuff. And we definitely do have all of that going on in Bleak House. But I really got the impression with Dickens that he really is an author with his ear to the ground. Excuse me. Yeah, just the number of themes coming up in the book. Let's say, so we have the poverty, the homelessness, the sanitation problems. We have the legal system, and the need for reform in the courts, and we have the slow decline of the aristocracy. We have the rising middle classes, the rise of industry and the bourgeoisie. We have religious revivalism. We have hypocrisy, and all sorts. And often these things are really kind of a cause of tension. They're all rubbing up against each other, or trying to pull away from each other. And it's I think a really fascinating period in time, and I think Dickens really understood the times he was living in, and I think really could portray them like no one else, really. So even though there are bits of this book, particularly in the second half, where you may feel it's dragging a bit, particularly in Esther's narrative. At least that was my experience. It's still, I think, an amazing book, and just to see how so many characters and so many subplots all come together at the end, it's just a masterful work. So just my last thought on the adaptation versus the real thing, I guess, is really, at least for me, I think you need both. I think because an adaptation, I think the idea behind an adaptation is you're trying to get the spirit of the book, really, and sometimes to do that they have to get rid of bits in the book that actually might be distracting from the spirit of the book, if that makes any sense. So there are bits in the book where it does feel like it's going off a bit in directions that it just doesn't need to, whereas this kind of, it normally stays on track. It's a little more fast paced, and there are times when I wish the TV show would slow down a little bit. But really, I think together they just complement each other really well. The shortcomings of the TV show are more than made up for in the novel, and the shortcomings of the novel are more than made up for, I think, particularly in this adaptation. So I would honestly say, do both. Watch it, read it. I'm not too precious about which order you do it in. I watched it first, and I still felt like I was discovering the book really for the first time. And I think obviously I don't really know, but I imagine that watching the adaptation will be it will feel like a new experience, I think, after reading the book. There are some of my thoughts on Bleak House. I hope that was a little bit insightful, or at least not a total drag. But yeah, that's that. I'll see you all at some point within the next week. I hope you all have a lovely weekend wherever you are. But yeah, that's that for now. Alright, booktube. Bye bye.